My thesis is on education and God's commands in the Bible on education and how we should raise our kids in the fear and admonition of the Lord, and the different types of methods of education and how some are glorifying to God and others are not. I selected this topic because I've been through various types of education, and so I just wanted to give my opinion on what I feel like the best type of education is and some types of education that are not good. So first off, I just want to give a quick thanks to my thesis mentor, Mr. Galliard, right over there, and then my parents, as well as Mr. Grotman, who all of them have helped me out with this tremendously, and I definitely could not be presenting this today without them. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Imagine a classroom that is the pinnacle of the postmodern man. It is the masterpiece of neutrality. The curriculum is a pure delivery of objective data, unburdened by the biases of religion. The teacher is a neutral facilitator. The school is merely a service provider of information. But we need to stop imagining, because this is an impossibility. Education, at its roots, is the total formation of a human soul. There is no such thing as a neutral view. Every choice a school makes is an act of worship. When a school teaches a student that they can learn about creation without learning about the Creator, or that morality is just a social contract, no neutrality has been achieved. What has been achieved is atheism. Ignoring God does not leave an open question. It definitively answers that He is irrelevant. You cannot leave a vacuum in a child's heart. If it is not filled by a love for God, it will quickly be filled by the secular beliefs of our age. The so-called neutral environment of the American public school is actually a war zone, and it is producing graduates who are lost. To understand how we can get out of this situation, you first need to understand how we got here. Education as we know it began in ancient Greeks. The ancient Greeks emphasized logic, ethics, and truth. After the fall of the Hellenistic age, the early Christian church preserved this method. Then came the Enlightenment, and human abilities replaced Scripture as the foundation. The Industrial Revolution made things worse. Everything created in this era was designed to produce a certain type of person, factory workers. The goal was no longer to form wise and virtuous citizens, but the most efficient cogs in an economic machine. By the 20th century, the new goal was simple: deliver information and have the student regurgitate it. Today, immorality characterizes our schools. Attention spans are shrinking. Critical thinking is declining. This is where we are. With that being said, here is the core of our dilemma today. There are different types of schools with different goals, and these goals produce very different outcomes, both academically and morally. This distinction matters enormously. Your children will spend approximately 13,000 waking hours in a school building between the ages of 3 to 18. It is where they will form their identity and where they're most impressionable. The culture of that environment will shape who they become. Your children will one day take your place in this world. You should not leave it up to chance how they will turn out. This brings us to the question that this speech is going to answer. How should a Christian parent think about education? This question has been asked as long as education has been around, and today, I am going to answer it from a biblical perspective. Here is my argument in one sentence. Christian parents, in order to fulfill the command of the Paideia, should be sending their children to classical Christian schools instead of public schools. I will make that case in 4 movements. First, I will establish what God's command of the Paideia actually is. Second, I will show how the public school system fails that command at every level. Third, I will present the alternative, classical Christian education, and how it restores what the public school system has dismantled. Finally, I will address two common objections people hear when they raise this argument. Before we can talk about what is wrong with public schools or why classical Christian education is the answer, we need to understand what education actually is. The word itself comes from the Latin educare, which means to raise or to bring up. This means that education is not something that starts when the bell rings and stops when it rings again. It is a daily rhythm that encompasses every part of a child's life. Every single thing a child participates in has the power to shape them. The way conflict is handled in the home, how Sunday morning is treated, none of these things feel like education, but they are forming a child's views on everything in their lives. Doug Wilson, pastor and forerunner of the CCE movement, puts it plainly in the case for classical Christian education. Education is fundamentally religious. Consequently, there is no question about whether a morality will be imposed in that education, but rather which morality will be imposed. If a child is always being shaped by something, then the culture that they are living in is just as important as the curriculum that they are being taught. What they are exposed to at school will impact their worldview. You cannot treat education as a separate part of life and expect it to produce a whole person. Now that we understand the all-encompassing nature of education, we can look at what God commands in the Bible. Ephesians 6:4 says, "Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord." The ESV translates that phrase as discipline and instruction. The original Greek word here is paideia, and it is much bigger than this. To the original audience, this meant the complete enculturation of a child toward excellence. So when I say paideia, I am referring to bringing up a child in a God-honoring way in all parts of life. This matters because at a true Christ-focused school, the Bible has to be the foundation that every other subject is built upon. This is why the myth of neutrality is so dangerous. Taking God out of the picture produces a school that is actively teaching children that He is irrelevant to all the subjects. The paideia of the Lord commands something completely different, that they leave home seeing reality through a Christ-centered lens. Doug Wilson says it plainly, education is the process whereby we teach our children to love and fear God or to hate and despise Him. So who is responsible for all of this? The answer is clear. It is the parents. Deuteronomy 6:6-7 could not be more explicit. "And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk to them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise." God is describing a total integration of a child's life with His truth, and He is speaking to parents. This means that schools must function as extensions of the home. When you drop your child off at school, you should be delegating a portion of your authority to teachers and administrators who are reinforcing what you are building at home. Doug Wilson says it well. Parents should see the work of a school as a supplement to their own teaching, enabling the parents to be even more effective in their time with their children. The parents are the ones given the charge to educate, train, and instruct their children. That responsibility cannot be handed over to an institution. When it works the way it is supposed to, when the home, church, and school are all teaching the same unified truth, the worldview of that child becomes deeply rooted. Everything in their life is pointing towards God's truth. That is the paideia of the Lord functioning as it was designed. The responsibility of the paideia cannot be ignored. And as we are about to see, it definitely cannot be handed to the public school system. Now that we know what the Bible says about education, we can look at what public schools are actually doing. The gap between the two is staggering. Let's start with worldview. Our public schools believe a classroom can be neutral towards religion. We have already established that this is impossible. Let's see what this supposed neutrality is actually doing. According to the Good Soil Report, only 37% of public school alumni view the Bible as an infallible guide for their lives. That is not neutrality. That is a result, and it is a direct one. When God is removed from the classroom, something has to fill its place. In America's public schools, that something is self-actualization. Students are stripped of their identity as image bearers and left to construct their own purpose out of whatever the culture hands them. The end goal has completely changed. The fruit of that change is rampant secularism. When you remove the divine lawgiver, you remove morality with him. C.S. Lewis says in The Abolition of Man, in a sort of ghastly simplicity, we remove the organ and demand the function. We make men without chests and expect of them virtue and enterprise. We laugh at honor and are shocked to find traitors in our midst. The secular model does just this. It removes truth, and students are left immoral. The result of all of this is graduates who are lost. There's no worldview holding their education together and no objective truth to stand on. If secular education is a puzzle, all the pieces come from different boxes. None of it fits. But as serious as the worldview problem is, another pressing issue may be what the public school system has done to the family. Historically, the school was an agent of the family, reinforcing what was being built at home. This is no longer the case. The state now views itself as the primary educator, and parents being involved at all feels more like a courtesy than a God-given right. The numbers back this up. A 2023 Gallup poll found that only a quarter of adults trust the public school system, and only 18% of parents feel they have influence over what their children are taught. 18%. That is not a partnership. That is a takeover. Many public school systems have implemented policies that prohibit staff from sharing crucial information with parents about their child. Think about that for a moment. A school system knows things about your child, yet refuses to tell you? The paideia is being actively dismantled. Douglas Wilson describes what this would mean practically for Christian parents in recovering the lost tools of learning. Parents have to spend at least a few hours every night countering what the children learned in school. This is difficult because the parents don't know exactly what the children learned that day. The children are not yet trained to come back and report on what was unbiblical in what they learned. Responsible oversight is extremely difficult. If schools are spending 13,000 hours indoctrinating your child, just think about how long it will take to reinforce the truth. The result of all of this is that many children are choosing the authority of their schools over the authority of their parents. The family, which is the primary unit of society, is being eroded away. And to make this situation worse, the public school system, even by its own standards, is failing. The secular worldview and erosion of parental authority have produced an assembly line approach to education. The public school system indoctrinates students into believing that nothing is related to anything else. Education has turned into confusion. And the goal of this system is not wisdom. It is a good score on a standardized test. Because of this, public schools use a mile-wide, inch-deep approach, abandoning the pursuit of genuine understanding. Schools have devalued memorization and true comprehension altogether. And even at this diminished standard, the floor is still dropping. Martin Hames, author and former educator, says public schools can be characterized by illiteracy, innumeracy, ignorance, and ill discipline. The data confirms it. Since 2011, reading scores on standardized tests have dropped by 11 points. Math scores have dropped by 23 points. These are not minor fluctuations. This is a generational collapse. Underneath all of it is a deeper problem. The subjects have no center. There is no end goal. It is just information, disconnected, purposeless, and forgotten the moment the test is over. This is the system that the majority of Christian children in America are sitting in for 13,000 hours of their most formative years. But there is a better method: classical Christian education. So what does this alternative actually look like? Classical Christian education, also known as CCE, is a stark contrast to everything we just covered because it is built upon a single unifying principle. All truth is God's truth. Every aspect of this method is oriented towards seeing God's world rightly and glorifying Him. The results reflect it. 86% of CCE graduates view the Bible as a guide for faith and behavior, more than double that of public school graduates. These are not minor differences. These are two outcomes produced by two completely different worldviews. Because classical Christian education restores the right worldview, it also restores the right order. It treats parents as the primary stakeholders in their child's education, just as the Bible commands. Because of this, 82% of CCE parents report being highly satisfied with the communication and moral alignment of their school. Think about that. And that satisfaction does not come from the school telling parents what they want to hear. It comes from the school sharing the same mission. Because parents are treated as partners instead of obstacles, their voices are reinforced instead of overridden. We have established that CCE is built on the right foundation with the right priorities. But what does this actually look like in the classroom? It starts with the trivium, a method that works with the natural stages of a child's development, which Mr. Grotman beat me to mentioning. First, mastering knowledge, then reasoning with it, then expressing it persuasively. This is not spitting facts onto a sheet of paper. Students are required to take dominion over their own education. And by refusing to dumb down the curriculum for the sake of everyone feeling good about themselves, CCE produces graduates who are genuinely ready for what comes next. Almost 9 out of 10 CCE graduates believe they were well prepared for college by their high school. 9 out of 10 of those who attended college walked away with a bachelor's degree or higher. And even on the public school's own terms, standardized testing, CCE students are scoring significantly higher than their public school counterparts. What really separates these two types of schools is integration. The Good Soil Report describes classical Christian education this way: the greatest distinctive is integration, the intentional way that the subjects and Christian truth are interwoven. Every class and every school activity has one purpose: to see God's world rightly and glorify Him. CCE is not a delivery system for information. It is a seamless, integrated, Christ-centered formation of the whole person. Exactly what the Bible commands. Douglas Wilson captures it perfectly. The ground for the necessity of Christian schools lies in this very thing, that no facts can be known unless it be known in its relationship to God. Romans 12:2 reads, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind." Classical Christian education is an institution built exactly for that renewal. Now, I want to address two common objections I have heard from personal experience when people engage with this issue, because they are legitimate concerns and deserve a real answer. The first is this: classical Christian schools cost more, yet public schools have better resources. Both of those things are true. Public schools are almost entirely tax-funded, and they appear to be free. Classical Christian schools charge tuition, and for many families, another big expense feels impossible. And yes, public schools often have programs and facilities that classical Christian schools cannot match. But here is what you need to consider. Quality resources do not guarantee quality outcomes. And public schools are proof of that. The tax-funded infrastructure has not prevented a 23-point collapse in math scores. Resources have not solved the problem because resources are not the problem. The foundation is the problem. Yes, CCE costs money, but if it is producing more with less, the question is not whether you can afford it. The question is whether you can afford not to. The second objection is about diversity. Public schools have a variety of ethnicities, backgrounds, and beliefs. And the argument goes that this exposure gives students a more real-world experience that prepares them for life in society. That is true. Public schools do offer a broader range of students, and this is because they are funded by everyone's tax dollars and spread across the entire country. But here is the problem with that reasoning. Diversity is not a virtue. What the public school's diverse environment often produces is graduates who have taken in so many different worldviews that they are not sure what they actually believe. Rather than throwing students into the deep end of a secular society before they have a worldview to stand on, classical Christian education builds that worldview first and then sends them out. And the results show that CCE graduates are not cloistered or sheltered, or rather equipped to engage in that world. Classical Christian education produces graduates who know exactly what they believe, why they believe it, and how to speak it. That is not a sheltered student. That is a dangerous one, and in the best possible way. That is an arrow that will hit its mark. That is a student who will slay dragons. We began this conversation by imagining a classroom, the masterpiece of neutrality, the pinnacle of the postmodern man. Books scrubbed clean of superstition, a teacher who facilitates nothing, a school that serves information and calls it education. And then we stopped imagining because that classroom is not neutral. It never was. It is a war zone, and for 13,000 hours, it is forming your children. Here is what we have established today. Education is not a service or a product. It is a daily, all-encompassing rhythm that governs everything a child thinks, loves, and desires. God gave this responsibility to parents. The public school system has failed that command. It has replaced God with atheism, parental authority with state authority, truth with standardized testing. And after decades of doing all those things, reading and math scores have collapsed, and only 4 out of 10 students who walk out of that system believe the Bible is true. That is a system in decline no matter how you look at it. Classical Christian education is the answer because it is built on the right foundation. All truth is God's truth. 9 out of 10 graduates leave anchored in their faith, prepared for college, prepared for their careers, and equipped to engage in a world that needs true leadership. Think about what you are deciding when you choose a school for your child. You are deciding who forms them for 13,000 hours. You are deciding if the home, the church, and the school will speak with one voice, or if your child will spend their entire youth being pulled in different directions. That is not a neutral decision. That is a significant act of stewardship. In the end, you will not stand before God and answer for your child's GPA. You will not give an account of whether they got into a good college, but you will be asked, what did you do with the command to raise your children in the paideia of the Lord? That responsibility cannot be handed to another institution. It is yours. By reclaiming authority and choosing a model that treats all truth as the Lord's truth, you can ensure that your children will graduate as men and women with a kingdom mindset. That is what at stake. That is what the paideia commands, and that is what your children deserve.